everyone. Welcome to the Global Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Whitney Putnam, and this is a podcast for leaders of all sorts, and I really mean that. We believe at the GLN that leaders come in all sorts. So leaders come here to this podcast community to learn to grow and expand their influence in healthy and holistic ways. Now, I have a question for you. What if I were to ask you, what does love have to do with work? Right? Good question. And maybe you are immediately thinking, love and work, that sounds too squishy or way too soft. Or maybe you started thinking, how would I even begin to measure love within work? Well, this month at the GLN podcast, we are talking all about leading with heart. And in today's conversation, we have GLN President and CEO David Ashcraft interviewing Marcus Buckingham. Now, if you are unfamiliar with Marcus Buckingham, he is a global researcher and a New York Times best-selling author. He is known for focusing on unlocking people's potential and strengths and pioneering the future of work. He also has two of the best-selling business books that are called First Break All the Rules and Now Discover Your Strengths. This is such an incredible conversation. You guys, on this podcast, we want to make sure we deliver you the best content so that you can listen to it and also share it. We listened to this conversation between David and Marcus, and we could not remove anything. It's a little bit longer, so whether you're running or jogging or cleaning or you're listening to this conversation as you're working, listen, we just want you to know, buckle up and tune in because you're going to learn all about how to tap into your own strengths as love being your decoder, as well as your teammates and everybody else that you work alongside and do life with alongside, how to allow love to be a decoder for strengths in their lives as well. We can't wait for you to dive into this conversation between Marcus and David.
Hey, well, hello, Marcus. Thank you for joining us today on the GLN podcast. Good to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here, David.
So, Marcus, I need to ask you as we kind of jump in today. I've had the privilege of getting to know you a little bit more personally over the last couple of years, but wanted to ask you, you have experienced incredible success, at least in my view, but not just mine, others. Reading some of your bio and preparing for this, you had one of the articles that you've written was listed as one of the most influential articles of the last 100 years. You've had a couple of books that one by the Wall Street Journal said that it's something that it's a must read for every leader and business leader. So I just wanted to ask you, I mean, that's the kind of thing that we all as speakers, leaders, writers dream of, having somebody at least notice our work, but you've gone way beyond being noticed. How do you deal with that success? How does it affect you, and how do you deal with it? And how do you keep your feet on the ground with that type of success and those kind of accolades?
Well, thank you. That's a great way to start a morning.
And I know that wasn't one of our questions, but it was fascinating to see how you've been received. And I know it's true and how much I've appreciated you, but just wondering does it impact you, and how does it impact you?
You know, it's funny. We all learn at the feet of giants. And one of the giants in my life was Dr. Don Clifton, who was the chairman of the Gallup organization when I joined. And I wrote my second book with him that launched the Strength Finder system. And when I joined, it was 1987. I had just graduated from university, and I was 20 years old, and he was 65, I suppose, had already done incredible things and was the chairman of this, amazing organization. And yet he couldn't stop moving. In the first 3 or 4 years, and he was a bombardier in the Second World War and had somehow had an accident where one leg was shorter than the other. So he was this kind of 65-year-old chap with a limp. And I can still remember, I think we were doing an event for Marriott in Atlanta, and we were late for the plane, and he was running for it, and I was trying to keep up with him. Hartsfield, as you know, is a big airport, and and we were both sitting way in the back of the plane, and I remember landing, finally getting, tired and charging around, and then we plopped down on our seats, and I remember thinking, I think I was 2 years into my career, and going, wow, why is he doing this? He could be anywhere, and he's running with me with a limp Friday night on a cramped plane flying back from Atlanta to Lincoln, Nebraska, which is where the Gallup organization was headquartered. And I realized that for him, there's no there. If you've got a mission that you really believe in, you just keep addressing the mission and trying to advance the mission. And you don't arrive and stop and go, well, jolly well done for me. Like I looked at him, and he's never done, right? He's got a mission that he's trying to live into. So for me, I sort of feel the same way. Like, I'm waking up this morning with you, and I've got 47 things on my to-do list that are all about, we haven't got there yet. When I wrote that article for HBR, it was out of a passionate desire to try to take, which is sort of my thing, is how do you take data and make it into a story that people can understand? Because I love data, but I know people sometimes shy away from it. So I think that one was all about feedback. And I wasn't writing it. I didn't know what HBR would do with that. I'm very happy they think it's one of the most influential for the last 100 years. But you write it because you're like, I can't not. Oh. And then you wake up this morning and I'm talking to you because I can't not. Yeah. And I don't know what that is. And I'm gratified that it gets recognition, but I would do it anyway because
So it doesn't really change your mindset or the way you behave or things like that? Or how do you keep it from going to your head too? And does your family keep you grounded, or you're pretty good at keeping yourself grounded, or how do you stay grounded that way?
Well, my spiritual beliefs are such that I believe God has given me some unique contributions to make. And the way to stay grounded is to stay connected to that purpose that I feel spiritually. And you don't fly away too far when you realize that you're in service. I don't want to sound too, I'm trying my best, like anyone is, to try to express something useful to somebody else. And I just don't feel that any recognition, although it's welcome, it doesn't confer anything on me that's in any way greater than the purpose that I was charged with. And I don't want to overblow. I'm just trying to do my best, just like you are, right? Yeah. And you're trying to express what you've been given the opportunity to express. And so you're always not enough. And I don't mean that in a bad way. You're just always no, there's more to do. Yeah. I don't dwell much on, every day for me starts at zero. I don't care how many numbers got racked up yesterday. Today starts at zero, and I'm scrabbling along like a swan. Anyway, you know what I mean.
Good job, and I appreciate you, and even just your in the midst of your success, your humility, and you're just easy to talk with and relatable. So thank you for staying grounded that way. Thank you for using your strengths, which the focus for our podcast in March is really leading with your heart. But before we jump in there, because you've done a lot of work recently on just the topic of love, but can I go back to your strengths revolution real quick? And it's been about 20 years or so since you actually began to talk about and introduce those concepts to us. So from a standpoint of working with leaders in particular, would you say, is there anything that there's so much that people have understood about your work there, but are there places that people have misunderstood, or they've taken what you've said and used it in the wrong way? Or have you felt like it's been, for the most part, used as you had hoped it would be?
I think in general, the idea that when you study the best leaders, and you find that they're so different in many, many, many ways, but you find that one of the few things that they do all share, the best leaders anyway, is an understanding that if you want to get the best out of another human, then you focus on strengths and manage around their weaknesses. That in general, I think, people have come to be like, no, I think that probably is the most effective way to get the best out of it. So I think in general, we've moved the conversation in a way that's more towards what the best leaders do, as opposed to ignoring that or fighting against that. So in general, I think people have moved that in the what I would say is the correct direction, which is trying to mirror or maximize what the best leaders do anyway. There's a couple of places where it has been sort of like, one is, you could say that you should focus on people's strengths because it's morally the right thing to do, because if you've got like 3 kids, you'll notice they've got very different strengths, and you could spend all of your time as a parent trying to get each kid to be more like the other. But of course, that's a hiding for nothing. So morally, it's just right to try to help a person step into the best of who they are. But the part that I think people sometimes miss is that you're doing this as a leader because of performance. This is an ROI question. You're investing in people's strengths not because it's nicer or even more moral. You're doing it because you're going to get the best increase in performance by helping a person to leverage their strengths intelligently. Yeah. What we've missed is that strengths are not just nice to have. They are a multiplier. So often our language turns into, you have strengths and then you have areas of opportunity. And areas of opportunity are the places where you're struggling. And so you have strengths, well done, and then areas of opportunity. What the best leaders seem to understand is, no. You have strengths, which are your greatest areas of opportunity, and then you have weaknesses that we need to manage around. And you can get a little better with the weaknesses, and we should. You absolutely should. This isn't a binary argument of ignore this. But the ROI issue, as a leader, you've only got a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
So the question, the real sort of, why would you focus? People often ask me, how do I get my leader to understand you should focus on strengths? And I always say, well, don't talk about strengths. Talk about performance. You've only got a certain amount of time. Where will you get the most increase in performance? We talk about a growth mindset, and Carol Dweck's work from Stanford about a growth mindset, and we should have a growth mindset. But that's not really the issue. The issue isn't will a person grow or not. We tend to agree that most people can grow. The question is, where will you grow the most? And I think that's one of the areas where people have maybe misunderstood what strengths is all about. It's not about patting someone on the head. You invest in strengths because we know this, and we know this biochemically. You will grow more synaptic connections in those parts of the brain where you have the most pre-existing.
Interesting.
That's how your brain works. Yeah. So if you just wanted to be purely selfish about it, dear leader, you focus on people's strengths because you're going to get the best J curve in terms of performance increase. It's very tricky to get people's head around that because they're so used to going, like, as a leader, you're sort of just plug in all the holes.
Yeah.
And if you're not careful, that's what your job becomes, in which case strengths are almost irrelevant because they're fine. Don't need to plug those. And it's getting that head to move and go, this is about performance and the best ROI on my investment of time to get that performance. Yeah. I think that's been the biggest place where people have kind of bumped into something and had to rethink it.
Yeah, interesting. Well, you've kind of moved from, and you probably haven't moved away from strengths, but you've added love maybe to the equation. Maybe it might be the way to say it. And first time I heard you talk about adding love to that equation, it was interesting to me because, first of all, I love your work on strengths. I love your work even now on that topic of love involved in all that, because to me it seems like common sense. And I love when data supports common sense. But talk a little bit about what strengths and love have to do with each other, kind of how you even jumped into this. Did you jump in thinking that you were going to find the answer to what you were studying to be love? Or what did you start out? How did you even start in the process? What were you looking for when you jumped into this?
Well, what I was looking for is data, because that's where I start with things. And there are times, I lost my dad a few years ago, and so there are times in life when you stop and you just reflect back and you sort of go, look, I'm here for a short time, so have I really done enough of the right sort of work to make sure that I've not left anything on the table? Like, I've really looked clear-eyed at what I've found over the last 30 years. Have I done that? And so I went back and looked at extreme productive behavior. So you're looking at incredibly successful people in their particular jobs, or incredibly successful teams, or departments, or stores, or restaurants, or divisions, whatever that unit of analysis was. And the focus was when people are displaying extreme positives in terms of their performance, or in terms of their feeling. I'm like a customer going 5, or an employee going 5 on a scale of 1 to 5, describing their experience. What caused the 5? I've always been interested in the extreme positives, not because we shouldn't look at the stuff where we're struggling. That's interesting. but because you learn something different when you study extreme positives. It's like saying, if you study a really, really happy marriage, you'll learn something different than studying unhappy. Health isn't just the absence of disease, right? So you've got to learn something about extreme positives. And when you drill down into that and go back and look at the focus groups and read the transcripts, and I knew this, David, I just sort of pushed it aside as though it wasn't correct. But the words that people would be using to describe their extreme positive experience, the words that people instinctively use is love. That's what they say. They'll say, I love working on this team. I love this company. I love that manager. When you're looking at extreme, the word's love. Even, I love this part of my job. I love this part of my job. I love this part. And so the word's love. And I think for the longest time, I kept going, I can't say that. I mean, that just sounds so non-worky or something. So we'll change it to engagement, or we'll change it to joy even, or passion, which are fine words, but that's not the words people are using. Yeah. So for me, I went looking for the ingredients behind the fives, because I think, as I shared on the GLS stage, we tend to top two box things and we put the fours with the fives. And so then you've got a lumping together of percent favorable when we're looking at employee engagement or customer experience. But actually, when you look at the data, fours are threes. In terms of actually predicting what someone's going to do, a 4 looks like a 3 and looks like a 2. So moving a 2 to a 3 to a 4 doesn't actually get you very much in terms of changing people's behavior. It's really when you get a 5, it's a curvilinear relationship. Yeah. When you want to predict what a customer is going to do, are they going to come back? Are they going to advocate? Are they going to buy more? Same with employees. Are they going to work harder? Are they going to be more creative? Are they going to be more loyal? If you want to predict those things, you got to look at the fives. And when you drill into the fives, you bump into love. So finally, for me, it was like, all right, stop trying to push that away. Be curious about what people mean when they say, I love this part of my job. Yeah. What does that mean? And of course, it ties to strengths, because when you pull on it, we can get into this if you'd like. There's two different ways in which love works, two very distinct ways. But one of them is, if you think about a strength not as something you're good at, and a weakness is something you're bad at, which is what we normally think. But actually, if you push on that even a little, you'll find that's an odd definition, because many of us have some things that we're really quite good at that we hate. We're just good at them because we're diligent, or because we're disciplined, or because we're intelligent, but we don't lean into them at all. Yeah. So when you realize that strength isn't what you're good at, weakness isn't what you're bad at, what you discover is that, of course, the definition of a strength is any activity that strengthens you. A strength is an activity that strengthens you. And it leads to appetite, which leads to practice, which leads to often, not always, but often an increase in performance. Yeah. Well, if a strength is an activity that strengthens you, then if you pull on that thread, David, the DNA of a strength, the thread, literally, as you know, I talk about them as red threads, but the thread is what you love. Yeah. So if you keep going into, well, what is a strength then? It's an activity that you love. It's a situation that you love. It's an interaction that you love. It's a moment that you love. It can sometimes be a place that you love, or even a person. Like there's some people are red threads of yours, and you lean into them. You do more with them. You surprise yourself by how well you did. So if you keep pushing through, what do people mean when they say, this is a strength of mine? What they're really meaning is it's a particular activity or situation or moment that they love. Yeah. And so, of course, what that leads to is, well, then love is a decoder, because the person who knows what you love better than anyone else does is you. So that's interesting, because then that puts you in the driver's seat to go, other people can tell you what your performance is, but you know what you love better than anyone else does. Now, no one's really told you how to use it to decode yourself. But I was immediately intrigued, David, by the idea that love is a decoder. Sort of God's given us this decoder to decode the mystery of you. And so many of us just, including me probably for many years, just shut it off. And it's like,
Yeah. So could I ask you, it feels like so often, wrongly, our mentality is, if I'm working, so it's one thing for me to love what I'm doing on my time, my hobbies and things like that. It's another with work where it feels like, I don't know that I should love this. It's just what I need to do in order to be successful in my job. But you're saying that we can love what we do work-wise, and it increases our performance, which then the return on investment, things like that. So how do we get past the thought that, man, it's okay to love what I do, as opposed to it's a chore? I mean, it's work, and work implies it's a chore, it's not enjoyable, but you're almost saying the exact opposite.
Well, I'm saying that there's a few things we know. We know, let's stick with that analogy of red thread. The idea that every day isn't just 24 hours, it's thousands of different interactions, situations, moments, an email here, a confrontation there, a conversation there, a thought process. It's just thousands of threads, if you like, in the fabric of your day. And some of them you're emotionally neutral about. So the threads, to use that metaphor, are black or green or gray or white or whatever. The red thread idea is that some of the threads are red. While you're doing them, time flies by. Before you do them, you're kind of weirdly looking forward to doing it. When you're doing it, someone almost has to drag you away from doing it. You surprise yourself by how well you did when you were doing it. When you've done with it, you sort of want to do it again. And these are very specific threads. When you're doing a thread like that, when you're doing an activity like that, we know your brain chemistry changes. We can measure it. You do have these elevated levels of certain neurotransmitters like norepinephrine or serotonin, oxytocin, anandamide. We know your brain is doing something different, which seems to dysregulate your kind of focused neocortex, which is like, get it done, get it done, get it done. And it does this, and it's what leads to innovation, to collaboration. You're open to more inputs. Your brain on love, if you like, is you at your smartest. So we know that. We know that love isn't a luxury. It's a catalyst. It amplifies you.
Yeah.
In all sorts of ways, but certainly when you're doing an activity that you love, your brain changes. We know that.
So Marcus, can I just say real quick, I experienced that yesterday. I had a workshop I was leading on a topic that I'd love to talk about. I told Ruth, my wife, when I went home last night, and it was about an 7-hour workshop that I was leading, talking the whole time. I said, I loved the day. I loved what I was doing, thoroughly enjoyed it. It did all those things that you just described. Then I also proceeded to tell her the next hour and a half, I had to do some just busy work that I have to do, answering emails, things like that. I said, if I could just spend my time just doing that type of workshop that I love, life would be wonderful. So I get what you're talking about as far as the high that you experience when you do what you love. Unfortunately, it's not all of my day, all of our days, but...
No, but the data on that is interesting because if you're not careful, you end up saying things like, find a job you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life again. But the data doesn't support that. I think you and I have talked about this, that because I always go back to data because for whatever reason, I love the precision of it and the reliability of it. But you keep looking for people to go, okay, well, you love 100% of what you do you? Your job is just a red quilt. And that's not true. So when you look at the most successful people, the data would suggest, and this is data out of the Mayo Clinic, so it's not perfect, but it's really rigorous and reliable data that suggests that if you study doctors and nurses that don't burn up, they've got 20% of the activities in their day that they love. Self-reported. They didn't use the metaphor of red threads. There was just what percentage of your day are activities that you love. The nurses and doctors that didn't burn up, and a lot do burn up. So they were looking at the extreme positives, if you like, of the doctors and nurses population. They were at 20% red threads. Well, that's interesting. That means you don't have to find a job you love. You have to find the love in what you do. That's what I shared on the GLS stage. That's different. Can you find the love in what you do? Can you find 20% red threads? That's doable for us. It does suggest that we humans, if you have 25 loveless days in a row, and then you try to cram 20% red threads in the final 2 days of a month, that doesn't work. That 20% needs to be every day. Love is people think it's a luxury, but it's like, no, it isn't. It's a force. Love, like any force, it needs to be expressed and then it can be productive. Think about the force of, lightning or electricity or water, or like if you dam it up, bad things happen. Love has got to come out. But we don't have to have 100%. But we do need 20%, and we do need every day.
Or Marcus, is that 20%, is that kind of the average or the norm? Like somebody that's top of their game, are they 25 or 30%? Or, I mean, should I be hoping and aspiring for 40 or 50 or 60%? Or is 20 really pretty much the average that most people are going to experience in their lives?
Well, here's what we know. We know that in this particular study, they were studying doctors and nurses who were really, really good at what they did and didn't burn up. Even during the pandemic, they didn't burn up. They didn't have, they had strong resilience. So they were actually looking at what you would consider to be sort of the top 5 or 10% of performers.
Okay.
And that number for them was 20%.
Yeah.
And it was a threshold. So if you were 40%, David, you weren't twice as resilient. If you were 60%, you were not 3 times as resilient. So for this particular study anyway, you get to 20% and it's like, I'm breathing. I'm breathing the way that I should in terms of expressing that which I love. And then the next day waking up and figuring out ways to do it again. I don't know, though, whether or not as you get, for example, older, does that number rise as you get older? And you're like, by the time I'm my age, I need 60% red threads because I'm smarter and I know myself better. So we've actually got more work to do to go, if that is a threshold, number one, that's interesting because we can start helping teenagers, young adults. Hey, look, no one's going to tell you what your red threads are but you can find them in any job. You know which are the specific activities that really light you up. You know what you lean into. Find them. Take them seriously because the best do. Like, what a great message that would be. But we've got more to study in terms of over time, do you need to keep moving that up? And is that actually the sign of true self-mastery as a leader? I would suggest that of all the research I've ever been a part of anyway, even the most successful leaders will have some things like you had last night. Yeah. It's just that the things they love to do invigorate to the point where it's easier to plow through some of the stuff some of the gray or the white or the black or the green.
Hey everybody, it's Eric, content producer of the Global Leadership Podcast. Listen, I want to talk to you for just a moment about Thrivent. We are so proud of our partnership with Thrivent. You see, they believe that money is a tool and not a goal. They work really hard to help people make financial choices that are guided by their Christian values so that they can take care of themselves and others. Visit Thrivent.com to learn how they can help you achieve your goals. And once again, we just want to say thank you to Thrivent for sponsoring today's episode.
Did you find in your research, is there a correlation, like if 20% I ought to love, is there a correlation that if I get to 10 or 15 or 20% of what I hate? So I imagine you would use the word gray. There's a lot of gray in there, which is like, I can do it, I don't enjoy it, but I don't hate it. There's something that I just hate doing. And even as I get older, Marcus, I probably have the opportunity to choose and self-select that I'm not going to do the stuff I hate anymore. When you're younger, you probably don't have that choice. But is there a balance of having too much in your schedule that you just despise doing?
No. Well, the data on this would suggest that what the most successful people do, if you think about love it, loathe it, if you go right to the extreme of it's not just a gray thread or a white or a black thread or whatever, it's barbed wire.
Yeah.
Doing it cuts you, hurts you psychologically. The most successful people are rigorous in cutting that out of their life. They'll cut it out. Not the neutrals. Not that just, hey, suck it up and do it, but the stuff where you're like, this hurts me for no good reason. It's not a gender, age, nationality, religion, race thing. It's just the clash of your chromosomes means when I sit in the middle of an Excel spreadsheet, I become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and angrier and angrier. The most successful people are like, find out what you hate doing and stop doing it. Figure out a way to stop doing it. Yeah. Don't suffer in the sense of every day I'm just getting, because you won't contribute your gifts if your days are spent being hurt by activity. It's like people go, you should get out. We can talk about this if you want, but in terms of troubling advice, one really troubling piece of advice would be just get out of your comfort zone. Just get out of your comfort zone. Well, to some extent, yeah, take a red thread and weave it in interesting new ways. Okay, that's great advice. But take a piece of barbed wire and try and turn it into a red thread, that's not great advice at all. Some people don't like selling. Some people do not, to try to persuade someone to take a no and turn it into a yes. There's no thrill at that. It's not just it's actually psychologically painful for me to try to confront you in that way. Yeah. And for someone else to go, well, if you worked at it, you could just get it. Come on.
Yeah.
It's as a leader, you go, I'm trying to rewire someone's brain. And if you've ever tried to do that with two kids of yours, we as parents, we know it's like that. I don't know what you're doing, but you're trying to rewire a gajillion things.
Yeah.
When you say get out of your comfort zone and you mean try to take a piece of barbed wire and turn it into a red thread, that's not doable.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. But what do you do then? So what you're talking about is some of it's self-awareness, knowing the things that you love doing, the things that you loathe. But what about from the employer standpoint? So if we're in a job situation, how much is it my responsibility as the boss, the supervisor, the employer to help you figure out what you love and what you loathe? And if your job responsibilities have requirements of things that maybe you loathe, how do I get past that? So what's my responsibility as an employer to help you in this whole process?
Well, it is help. People develop best in response to another human being, and very often that other human being is the team leader. But the interesting thing about this whole, and the next 10 years of my life, I think, are going to be focused on helping people to actually operationalize this, because we live in a real world, right, where people have to operationalize. But what you have to remember as a team leader is you can't do this for someone. You can't tell them what their red threads are. I don't care how insightful you are. You might have worked with someone for 10 years in a row sitting right next door to them. You won't, if you actually push someone to go, tell me the specific activities that you love, they're the ones who are the authority on that. So what a team leader can do is you can say things like, look, I'm interested in where you're at your best. Not where you are at the best. I'm interested in where you're at your best. I'm interested in where you find love in what you do. Here's a blank sheet of paper. Put a line down the middle of it, put love at the top of the one column, loathe it at the top of the other, take it around with you for a week, and then come back to me and we'll have a conversation about what's on your love it and loathe it list. To begin with, and by the way, a leader can do that. Just go, hey, take it around with you for a week, come back and talk to me. And the first value of that is awareness. It's just that person's now shared with you something that they were aware of, and now you're aware of it. Now they're aware that you're aware that they're aware. Okay, that's good. Just that awareness is a powerful thing in that way. In terms of the stuff that's on the loathe it list, it's their responsibility, not yours to tell you, first of all. It's their responsibility, not yours to tell you. And of course, there has to be trust if they're going to share that with you. But if they are sharing that with you, there are then, not immediately, it's just awareness. You're a team leader. You're bothering to pay attention to the person's unique story. Who are they? What do they lean into? Where do they learn best? How do they deal with change? What motivates them? Like, you're just doing what a good leader does and paying attention to the individual. If there's some stuff that they loathe, barbed wire, as it were, it is the leader's responsibility at some point to realize, well, that's real for you. You're not trying to get out of something. You're trying to remove the friction from something. In which case, by the way, there are some strategies you can use. Partnering is an obvious one. Somebody else might have a red thread where you have a barbed wire. That's the beautiful thing about the uniqueness of humans. No one's well-rounded, but the team's well-rounded because each individual isn't well-rounded. That's a smart thing to understand. So partnership, systems. Sometimes you can have systems or technology that can come in and plug a gap. Sometimes you can use a red thread to do, like for me, I think I've shared this with you. Mingling is barbed wire for me. I hate mingling. I'll never be good at it. Well, sorry, I'm not bad at it. I always hate it. But a red thread of mine is interviewing. I love interviewing people. So if I'm going to an event, I'm not going to just hide in my room. But sometimes you can use a red thread to mitigate the barbed wire. For me, that means just go to a party, pick 3 people sequentially, and interview them one by one by one. Just ask a few questions and shut up and listen. I'm not mingling. I look like I'm mingling, but I'm not. I'm just interviewing. And then I go home. So now, and the last thing, of course, at some point you go, well, I'm sorry, you can't partner. There is no technology or system to support that. You can't use a red thread to mitigate it. And then, frankly, we're left with, oh my, okay, well, that's a piece of barbed wire. It's in you. What do I do with it? And you don't go there immediately. You iterate to, that's why the most valuable thing you could do as a leader is to check in with people each week, because you gradually over time learn more about that. At some point, it may be that you go, oh my, we've got you in a job where some critical aspect of it is what you, for whatever reason, consider barbed wire. Well, at that point, we have a more intentional conversation about whether or not we can change the job to remove that, or whether we need to move you out of it because we didn't anticipate it. All of which, as you know, is in the world of complexity and frequent change, the only solution you've got as a team leader is frequent conversations, which gets us to check-ins, 15 minutes every week with every person, asking those two questions of, what did you love last week? What are you working on this week? Love and loathe, what are you working on? That's the rhythm to deal with the complexity of the human and the frequency of change.
And some of this you came up with quite some time ago, I suppose, because at the GLN, we use your standout material. I've got to tell you, I actually very much enjoy it. One of the things that I loathed before were one-on-one meetings, and did not enjoy them. And this, I love the weekly check-ins and just calling them a check-in as opposed to a one-on-one where somehow I have to come with an agenda for you or you come with me. And so very much appreciate your content and material. And it's something that I've grown to very much appreciate. I was almost going to use the word love, but I'm not sure I'm ready to say that yet. But it's totally changed my perspective on those types of things. But Marcus, you've been working on this for a while, so because you've had Standout for a while, and so it's fun to watch it all moving in the same direction, and what you've studied and what the data showed you in the past is actually continuing to grow and build toward the whole concept of doing things that you love or using love in the work environment. So fun to see that happen.
Well, and I'm not coming up with something new out of left field that undermines. It's like we have known for a long time that the single most frequently used ritual from the best team leaders is this is a mouthful, but it's a frequent light touch check-in about near-term future work. They just do that one-on-one. We then called that a few years ago, well, gosh, that's a check-in. That's what that is. Not check up on, right? Check in with. They do that. So there's no question that's just a good thing to do anyway, right?
Yeah.
And then when you start drilling into, well, whose responsibility is it to help someone find the love in what they do? Well, it really is the individual's. But the check-in actually becomes, oh gosh, that becomes quite a useful spur, a nudge that team leader every week's going, I'm listening to what you love. I want you to help. I want to help. I want to help. I want to help. It doesn't mean that the leader's going to fix it for you. So I love that idea that we're putting the locus of responsibility where it should be on the individual. And we're saying, hey, listen, I don't know what you love, and I don't know how that weaves into strengths. I don't know how that weaves into performance. I don't. I want to help you, though. And so that check-in becomes kind of a lovely, ongoing, what's a manager responsible for? Oh, you know what you've got? The most valuable thing you've got as a team leader? Attention. That's what you've got. You bring attention. Okay, so bring it in a predictable, light touch way and weave love into strengths. Okay, that's what you should do, team leader. Yeah. You're not answering the question.
Yeah.
You're bringing the power of your attention. That's what team leaders do. So yeah, these things build on one another because they just get deeper and deeper into the quintessence of the human, you know?
Yeah. Well, one more thing I'll say about the weekly check-ins, Marcus. I think they're so critical, especially in our environment. We're semi-remote. And my previous situation, I was in an office surrounded by the people that I'm working with all the time. So part of the reason why I didn't like one-on-one scheduled, it was just easier to go and almost do check-ins just all the time. If I had a question, they had a question, we just hit each other real quick. We were constantly checking in. But when you're working remotely, that much more the necessity for that. Can I ask you, Marcus, one of my hardest things is when somebody loathes something, and I appreciate your analogy of that barbed wire because that helps me understand it a little bit more, but somebody loathes something that I just have a hard time getting my head around. How could you possibly loathe this in your job? And it's a big piece of your job that you need to be doing. And so what do you tell me to help me understand or accept somebody else's loathe that just doesn't seem logical to me?
Well, I would, if we were having a coaching session, it's not logic, is it? I mean, if you think about excellence is based upon, people often say discipline practice leads to performance, leads to excellence, which is true. But the thing that comes before discipline practice is appetite. So it's appetite leads to practice, leads to performance. And appetite has huge emotional components in it. What do you lean into? Where do you find that you've got those signs of love where time's flying by and you're just in it? It's not you doing the task. It's you in the task. You're just sort of like your 8-hour day, which goes by in, I bet it felt like it flew by, right? What you would have to understand is what I would have to understand, which is that, God made us unique for a reason. And that means that the world that I see isn't the world that you see. So if someone comes back and goes, I loathe that, you don't go, yes, you do. No, you don't. Or it doesn't make sense that you would. You've got to go, it's all about locus of responsibility, David, and saying to somebody, okay, listen, your emotional reaction to every single activity or moment or situation in the world is emotionally laden. It has power in it. It literally has energy in it. Like everything in physics, they say, if you want to understand physics, the simplest way to do it poetically is to say that everything sings. Every atom, every compound, every element, everything is vibrating at a certain frequency. And if you wanted to understand physics, you start with everything sings. Well, the same is true in psychology. Everything sings to you. Every activity or moment or situation's got energy in it. And when things are vibrating for you incredibly positively, we call that love. And there are these behavioral signs of time flying by, of you getting so into it, you're immersed. So if that's true, then really what I would say to you is, listen, everybody's individual life is singing to them in a language that only they understand. There's 8 billion love languages, and they're all singing a different tune. The most successful people learn and relearn their own love language so they can listen to what the song is their life is singing to them, and it draws them towards certain activities and away from others, and they take that seriously. So if someone comes to you and says, I loathe that, it's barbed wire, that song is being sung to them. You can't even hear it. It's like a dog whistle for you. You can't hear it. But if the dog comes running because you blew the thing, then you have to honor the fact that somebody is hearing something you're not. And again, the point of this isn't to get rid of the gray, the green, the neutrals. Suck it up and do it. Figure out a way. But if someone comes and goes, this cuts me to the core, I can't hear that screech anymore. It's like nails. I'm sure you've heard some people in the course of your career say this. Doing that is like nails on a chalkboard. Then at some point, as the most effective leader will go, okay, I hear that. In the back of your head, you're going, my job isn't to make your life happy. We're trying to get a bunch of stuff done. But you have to hear the person's going, nails on a chalkboard, nails on a chalkboard. At which point, we sort of go down that path of mitigation strategies we covered earlier, which might end up going, oh my, we've got you in a job where every single day there's nails on a chalkboard and we can't figure out a way around it. You're a really good human in the wrong job. Which is why in the end, of course, it's a loving thing to do to that human to go, I love you, but you're fired from this job because as you know, that doesn't if you're not doing those check-ins, if it's just once a year, it's super stressful for everyone because everyone feels like the leader feels like everything has to be bottled up into one meeting. The person feels like they're going to get judged in one meeting. What you really want is an ongoing kind of conversation with each other about how do I ongoingly figure out a way to have a lot of red threads in my job. So I'm leaning in, I'm leaning in, I'm leaning in.
Exactly.
And that's iterative.
And I
just
think
like
probably,
the barbed wire is iterative.
yeah, and I think, Marcus, one of the ways I hope that I've grown most over the years in leading people, early on, I expected everybody to think and feel like I feel. And I just did not understand if they thought or felt differently, or if they loved or loathed things differently than I did. And so having to learn that we're all different and their perspectives, and they may not love what I love, and they may loathe what I don't loathe. So that's been a growing experience for me. It took longer than I probably wish it had, but that's been a big learning experience for me. So.
Well, and it's like, we first have to understand that everyone's life is singing to them in a language only they understand.
Right.
Which I wish we were teaching in schools. We aren't, which means that we're then hiring people that are frankly disfluent.
Yeah.
They are disfluent in the language their life is speaking to them in, which is a crying shame, because it means they don't have much self-mastery. But even if they do have that over time, David, one of the things that's super important for any leader to remember, of course, is this is love and work. So once we're thinking about those red threads, you're not doing it to go, oh gosh, how interesting. You're going, okay, then weave it into something useful. Yeah. How I work really hard. The point of love, in a sense, is to go, step it up, step into that, turn it into a strength. That takes intelligence. It takes intentionality. And we're sort of doing it all wrong, because we're having people arrive in the world of work. They don't really know anything about their love language. They don't understand the detail of what it is they lean into versus what they don't. And so the leader is trying to like take this blank slate and sort of shove it into certain jobs. We should turn the responsibility around and go, no, you're coming into here. You're telling me what you lean into and what you don't. You're telling me what your red threads are. And then together we're figuring out how intelligently and intentionally you're turning that into contribution. This isn't about softness. Love isn't soft.
Yeah.
It's super expectant,
Yeah.
And that's the other part, going all the way back to one of your first questions, what's missed about even the strengths idea is that it's nicer. In a way, it's not nicer. It's just more intelligent.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I want you to step into this love that you've got these red threads. Use them. Let's figure it out together. The beautiful thing about doing it that way is that it's a much more creative and invigorating conversation. Even if the person's red threads aren't your own, you're still tossing it back to them to go, come on.
Yeah.
Weave them into performance in some way. Help me, help you, help me, help you.
But to your point, I wish they were teaching this in school, or they were learning this earlier on, because where it's frustrating sometimes from an employer standpoint is, yes, you learned what your loves and lows are on my time. It may end up not helping me accomplish what we're trying to accomplish as an organization. But then it's also reverse of that. It's incredibly fulfilling when the light comes on as to what they love, and they're working in your position or in your organization in a position that they can really excel at that, and everybody wins. So, but yeah, it'd be nice if they learned it earlier sometimes. So.
Yeah, it just means that you wouldn't have to try to do it all for them when they come in at 23, 24, 25 years old, or 35, 45 years old, and you're still like, gosh, you don't. This is all about agency, really. Yeah. How does a person have agency when they come to work on your team? And yes, unfortunately, right now, no one ever really, even if you studied psychology all the way through college, no one ever says to you, every activity has energy within it. You've got to figure out which activities have the most energy for you. Yeah. Like, no, that's not, you don't learn that.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's real. And so unfortunately, you do sort of have to learn that on someone else's time.
Yeah.
The best leaders, though, I think we would have to agree, would be like, no, that's a thing. Everybody is individually unique. They do get energy out of different things. It's just way more efficient, if you like, for me to help a person figure that out. I mean, look, the worst way to spend your time as a leader is to consistently expect someone to behave in a way that they don't.
Right.
And then you're repeating yourself ad infinitum, wondering why you're failing as a leader.
Right.
When in fact, it's because you're talking too much and you haven't really listened to what the other person's telling you about the world that they see.
Yeah. Marcus, I so much appreciate what you're saying, what you're learning, what you're helping us understand. One final question, I guess, is the first time I heard you talk about this and the word love in a business context caught me off guard, because I come out of a church faith-based context and we talk about love often. but hearing that word in a business context feels very different. And so how has that been received in the business community? Is it one where people go, wait a minute, that feels like love is what you do the other hours that you're not working, but when you're working, it's work. And so how's that been received?
I have to tell you, David, even when people were grabbing onto the idea of focusing on strengths and managing around their weaknesses, which they did, I've never seen a reaction like this before. I've never seen so many companies. It's almost like, because there's two sides of love, really. One is what I call mover, which is how do you design love into your own work so you move through your own life in a way that's nourishing for you. That's a role we all play, mover. How do you move through life and design love into what you do, which is kind of what you were talking about in terms of red threads and so forth. And that 8-hour day you had the other day, it was like, oh gosh, how do I replicate that or find ways to do more of that? But the other side of that, David, is maker. How do you make experiences for others that they come to love? Because if you study the fives, like for customers, let's say, they're saying, I love that company. I love that. I can't imagine a world without that company. I love that organization. I love that brand. And so there's a whole side of this, which is how do we actually make experiences for others, which they say, I love? And that turns out to be something where almost every company, and I won't mention all the names of the companies, but you'll just think of the best companies, the ones that immediately would start popping into your head if I asked you to go, imagine a world without. There's not a lot of companies, but there's a few that you go, no, that one, ooh, that would be a miss. And oh my word, we'd miss that one. Those are actually the companies which are, frankly, banging on the door going, we want to design loving experiences for guests, for patients, for students. What is it to design an experience lovingly? We're living in a world, if we're not careful, as you well know, where we're becoming increasingly dismissive of love. And we're moving into an increasingly transactional world where employees are just full-time equivalents or customers are treated just as their financial value to the transaction. And you get more of what you accept. And it's becoming increasingly acceptable to look at students or patients or employees or customers as just an element of a transaction. Well, there's a bunch of companies going, that is not okay. Now, maybe there's a bunch of churches saying that too, but there's certainly a bunch of companies going, that's not okay. We will not reduce everything to transactionalism, because then we've just removed not just our competitive advantage, we've removed our moral commitment to service. And there are some companies, frankly, that take that really seriously. So they're going, what is it to make loving experiences? What is it to operationalize loving experience design? Because if you don't design an experience, you're going to get unpredictable outcomes. And companies really don't want that. They want predictable outcomes where people walk around going, I love that. So it's been really interesting to have, first of all, there's clearly this kind of pent up energy going, we don't want to just have it be turned into a transactional world. And they're grabbing for something. And I think love is if you're not careful, it's flattened into romantic love and it's chocolates in front of the Eiffel Tower. But if you really step into it, it's a beautiful human thing to want to step into love. All these companies, once you've established the hard-edgedness of it, that love is a predictor of human behavior. It's not soft. It's the most powerful predictor there is, which, by the way, is not that hard to do, to show the data that says, if you want to know what people are going to do, look at what they love. Like, that's a thing. And almost instinctively, David, people go, yeah, I get that. Then to go, well, okay, how do we operationalize it? It's funny. Those companies are like, no, tell me more. Tell me more. How do I do that? How do I do that? So it hasn't been nearly as much of a pushing a noodle up a hill as I thought it was. Perhaps because the data is so compelling that love is this predictor of human behavior, which of course every company, every CEO is interested in. But also because I think deep down as humans, we want to step into love. We just have lived in a world that's made it increasingly inappropriate to talk about.
That's great. Yeah, very good. Well, Marcus, appreciate what you're working on. Appreciate what you're finding. Thank you for digging into the data to to be able to help people accept what you're saying is more than just a feeling. There's facts that's backing it up. So appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for your involvement with the GLN too. You've, I think, been on our stage 5-6 times at least, and somebody that we very much appreciate around the Global Leadership Network. So thank you for your involvement, and thank you for your contributions. You're doing a great job.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. And I think that everything that GLN's doing is hugely important for all the reasons that you know. So anything that I can continue to do to be of service, well, you know how to reach me.
Great. And how should people follow up with you? So people that are listening, what's the best way to find out and stay current with what you're doing, Marcus?
Well, so there's 2 places to kind of go find out about me. One is launch something called the Buckingham Institute, which is trying to take all of this data over the last 30 years and have it be a place where people can find all the articles and all the books and so forth. So the Buckingham Institute.
Okay.
And then I am launching an organization called DLI, Design Love In. So if there's anyone who wants to know about how can I as a leader design love in, whether it's to my own life, whether it's to the lives of the others that I lead or serve, Design Love In.
Okay.
Go to there and there'll be all sorts of things over the next 10 years. That's kind of where I'm going to be living, I think, David, is like going to go make a whole bunch of stuff to be taking it off the wall, if you will, and turning it into methodologies.
Fantastic. Good. Marcus, thank you. Appreciate your time today.
My pleasure.
Well, maybe you'll answer that question that I alluded to in the earlier part of this episode. What do you think love has to do with work? Maybe you're going to think about that just a little bit differently now. One thing that I can't stop thinking about, actually cannot stop thinking about, is how Marcus described love as a force. Remember when Marcus was telling David that love is a force, like wind is a force or water is a force? And for those of you that think visually, to actually think about love, let's say as water getting dammed up and how that actually feels within a person. And maybe that resonates with you. Maybe right now in your job or in your life, you're feeling like, oh man, if love is a force, mine is definitely damned. I need to be able to have proper conversations to unlock that love, to begin really enjoying my work. And here's the thing, and this is maybe your best next step. Start noticing. Maybe you literally have to take out a journal and start tracking your day. Ooh, I loved this, or this felt really easy. Where was your energy really high, or you just lost track of time? Or maybe you just start noticing and you remember at the end of your day, oh, that felt so good. And as Marcus called that, that's the red thread. And here's the thing. I do want to say this. I actually use Marcus' tool all the time with the leaders that I work as well as the leaders that manage me. It's given me really clear conversation starters to be able to make sure I'm telling those that I lead and the person who leads me, hey, this was a red thread in my week. This is what I really loved. So I want to encourage you, one, start noticing. Where do you feel like you lose track of time? Let that be your decoder, and you're the only one that can notice it for yourself. Just remember, nobody else gets to notice that except for you. And then use some of these conversation starters that Marcus gives us in this conversation. You can also pick up his books where you'll also be able to start communicating with those around you. This did feel like love. This does feel like my red thread, and start noticing how your enthusiasm for work starts increasing. Now listen, Marcus was a speaker on our GLS 24 stage, and he was fantastic. And we are already looking very clearly to GLS 25. And we know that the same kind of tools and expertise that was brought to us from GLS 24 is going to be the same at GLS 25. So we want you to start thinking about already purchasing your tickets and bringing your team. The power in bringing your team is so transformative because you start getting to talk and using the same language that you learned at the summit. So go and make sure to check out www.globalleadership.org/summit to purchase your tickets today. And listen, you know that we love, no pun intended, reading how much this podcast is changing your life. So would you make sure that you leave a review? David and I read them. They really do make us so happy to know that you are being transformed and therefore transforming the lives of others exactly in the way that you were designed to. You guys, it's been so good to be together. And just remember that... What's the line? Everyone wins when the leader gets better. Oh my gosh, hold on.